Yes. I'd like to propose Councillor Graham Morton as chair.
And I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone back to the council chamber. We're ready to go. I'm going to go through the process that we have to go through, which is some of the health and safety introductions, then we'll actually get on with it, if that's okay with everyone. Point 2 on the agenda is evacuation procedure. That is, a fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside Warwick House on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door by which you entered the room or by the fire exits which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit lights signs. If you need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff. Please also make sure all your mobile phones, including mine, are turned off or set to silent. Okay. Right. Apologies? No apologies. Thank you. Declarations of interest are as published. Sorry, Mrs. Lloyd.
Sorry, our technical officer, Mr. Castley, is on annual leave this week, so he won't be here.
Thank you. Declarations of interest are as published. Okay, so we now move through the agenda to page 8, which is the procedure at the licensing hearings. Oh, sorry, introductions first. Yes, okay, yeah. Councillor Graham Morton from Bedworth, Heath, to my left.
Joy Coventry Morton, councillor.
And Councillor Mandy Tromans.
Okay, applicants.
Mark Wells, Western Lawns.
Denise Banks, Western Lawns.
Duncan Craig, I'm here to represent the applicant.
Damien Eston, acting as consultant for the applicant.
Thank you very much. Officers.
Julianne Lloyd, Senior Licensing Officer.
Helen Mulholland, Senior Licensing Officer.
Objectors.
Charles Marshall, Willow Lodge, Bedworth Road.
Mark Biggers, Willow Lodge, Bedworth Road.
Karen Leach from Homestead, Bedworth Road.
Scott Leach, Homestead, Bedworth Road.
David Cole, Bedworth Road.
Thank you very much. Okay, so can I remind all parties of their right to address and present evidence to the subcommittee and, if permitted, to question other parties? Also, please, can I remind you of your right to be represented at the hearing? Madam Clerk, can you confirm that no notice of hearing has been issued?
Chair, there has not been. The notice of hearing has been prescribed in the prescribed parties and to advise of any notices received from a party. And also I can confirm that there hasn't been any withdrawals of representations received.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the parties now if there are any other adjournments or representations to be made at this stage? The applicants.
I'd like to raise a question about some letters which have been introduced this morning, because we were clearly under the impression that no new evidence could be introduced during the period of adjournment.
Yes, sir. I'm aware that there has been some letters of support submitted and received. I'm advised that we note that they've been submitted. They've not been shown to the panel. The understanding at this stage is that rather than there being merely supporting documents to the application, they're actually representations. So the advice is that representations are not allowed at this late stage.
Okay, I mean, look, I don't think they letters themselves are going to take us very far, but I absolutely profoundly disagree that they're representations. Case law is clear on this. McCool and Rushcliffe, for example, any evidence is admissible in a licensing hearing. And let's just give an example on the flip side. Let's just say this was a review application by the police, and they then wanted to submit a witness statement from a third party who hadn't made representations. Would that be inadmissible? Assuming that position would lead to absurd consequences, frankly. I just simply don't agree that they're representations. People are perfectly at liberty to put evidence in support at any point prior to the hearing. So I don't agree with that decision. I don't agree with that advice. But look, as I've said, I don't think that those 3 letters from local residents take the application very far. Just after the last hearing, my client said to me that there were a number of residents who were supportive of the event and of what the farm was doing, and I just asked Denise if she could get me some of those letters. They came to me last night, and I forwarded them this morning. First thing I did this morning when I got ready and was at my desk working. So I'm not going to take a major issue because I don't think they really are material anyway. Okay, but thank you.
Okay, and for the sake of transparency, we've also been informed that a similar thing has happened from the objectors and that they've been declined as well. So that's where we are now.
Well, I have to say, on that basis, that's a fair outcome if that's the case. So fair enough. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy with that. As I indicated at the opening hearing, I'm interested in fairness. What's good for one should be good for the other party.
Okay, having just said all that, I'm going to invite now, is there any other further documentary supporting evidence that anyone wants to submit at this stage? Getting a no, thank you so much. Okay, so again, we're almost there. The order of the process will be the applicants will outline their case. We, the subcommittee, may ask or will ask questions to seek clarification, of course. Any responsible authorities who aren't here actually today, I don't know if the officers are part of that, no?
Sorry, Chair, no, there'll be no responsible authorities here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so interested parties, obviously yourselves, will be able to ask questions at any time, really. Okay, so yeah, that's basically the outline of how it's going to go. So, of course, you have your opportunity as well to outline your cases, and of course, the applicants can ask you questions too. Okay, so there we go. Okay, and there will also be opportunities for both sides to make their closing speeches before we adjourn to make a decision. Okay. I'm just checking what else I have to say. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Madam Chair, I think we're ready to start the hearing. Okay, can I invite the applicant to present their case? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think anybody in this room is going to disagree that the designer of this room didn't perhaps have modern technology and ergonomics in mind. I will do my best to juggle as I can. This is not the first time this has happened. Newham's another council where I have terrible problems with the desk in front of me, but I will do my very best to deal with it. Yes, indeed, this is an application for the grant of a premises licence at Western Lawns, which is a farm and an equestrian centre owned by Mark Wells. It's been in his family, in fact, for 59 years. And I think it's probably right to say, to give an overview, Mark has, like many farmers, has a number of challenges that are in front of him in terms of making his business or his land or his farm, however way you want to describe it, viable. And it's not unusual in those circumstances that farmers will look at diversifying into other areas. And I think it's right to say, I don't think there's anything... Mark has a lot of land and there are a number of options open to him. He has had approaches from people in relation to waste disposal at the site. He's had approaches from developers who in terms of residential development at the site. And those, whilst those are both potentially viable options for him, he is seeking, if at all possible, to avoid that, going down that route. He has an emotional attachment to the site. It's been in his family, as I say, forgive me, not 59 years, for 63 years, since 1959. And so he is looking at ways of anchoring the site so that it is viable broadly in its current format, as a farm, as an equestrian centre, as well. And so accordingly, a few years ago, I think it was around 2019, a decision was made by him to apply for a licence, a premises licence, on the site for a festival. And that licence, in fact, was granted. There were, it wasn't myself who dealt with that. It was a gentleman called Matthew Phipps, who's at TLT Solicitors. I know Matthew very well professionally. I like Matthew a lot. Matthew deals with a lot of festivals. He, for example, is the licensing solicitor for Glastonbury, as one example. So Matthew was a sensible choice, certainly, to draft the application. The application went, and there were a number of observations by responsible authorities, especially Warwickshire Police and Environmental Health. And following that, there was no hearing, there were no objections. Obviously, there were discussions, inevitably there are. And the licence was granted. So that is the licence that sits, and I will take you to that in due course, members. But that licence currently subsists as a premises licence on the site. So why are we applying for a new licence? Well, there's simply two reasons for that. The personnel have changed and the investors in the project have changed. And in addition to that, the conditions, I looked at the conditions on the licence, and whilst they were extremely well worded, I felt that they could have, there was a slight amount of consolidation that could be undertaken. And in those circumstances, given the person, the licence, I mean, it could have been transferred and varied, but that is essentially the same process and the same mechanics and the same cost as applying for a new licence. And it's certainly not unusual, and I know if you're advised on this, I'm confident what I'm saying will be in accordance with this, that it's perfectly normal for a new licence to be applied for on a site. And in actual fact, Section 3 of the Licensing Act provides that there is no limit to the number of licences on a site, no limit to the number of licences a legal entity can own on the same site. So the application is in accordance with that. And I'll just turn, if I may, to the... So if you turn to the agenda pack at page 27, And so just, I think everybody's aware of this, and it was on the notices as well, that this is an application for one weekend only. That weekend to be determined and to be notified significantly in advance. One weekend a year, Friday and Saturday till 2 a.m. and then Sunday till 11. So there will only be one event per year. Just to, it's important to identify at this stage that the people we have in the room who are objecting to this application, none of them are responsible authorities. I have had discussions with Warwickshire Police at some length about this application before it went in, because I always think dialogue is important to engage in if you can, to try and iron out any issues. So I had that discussion with them. There were no objections from them to this application, no objections from any responsible authorities, because presumably they understood that this was essentially swapping like for like, was not changing the situation. I think that there is a slight extension in the hours, but not at the end, but at 11 in the morning on the Saturday instead of, I think it was 2 in the afternoon. But other than that, the hours, unlike maybe the Friday, forgive me, I'll turn to that shortly, but certainly the hours are broadly the same. And I think what is as important to point out about the lack of responsible authority representations on this application is the fact that whatever event takes place here, the one event a year, will be subject to the SAG. It will have to go through the Safety Advisory Group. There are a number of hurdles that the applicants here will have to jump through in order that not just the responsible authorities, but other statutory bodies such as the ambulance service and highways and other bodies that are charged with ensuring public safety with events such as this are consulted at appropriate times, and that they have any time effectively the power of veto over any events at the premises if they feel that public safety is going to be undermined. So I just make that point because if you're granting the licence today, it's on a case that the applicant here is just going to walk away and be able to put a rave on. A couple of days later, there is a regimented process that needs to be followed, that statutory bodies who are experts in their own field will have a intimate involvement with, and if they feel that the event in any way is going to undermine public safety, the event won't take place. It won't take place. So from that point of view, there is all this does is provide a gateway to an event taking place. It is not the end of the story like it would be if you had a restaurant license that had been granted and you could just crack on and start selling alcohol straight away. So I think it's important for everybody in this room to bear that in mind respectfully when determining this application. The operating schedule itself, so just to explain, the operating schedule is the part of the application that provides a framework for the applicant to state what steps they intend to take in order to promote the licensing objectives. And what then happens with the operating schedule is that at the end of the process, officers will then convert that into enforceable conditions on the licence. And why that's important is that conditions, when they are precisely worded, and I would like to think that these conditions are precisely worded because I've gone through them with a fine-tooth comb to ensure that's the case. And as I've said, I've streamlined them a little, but they effectively serve the same purpose as the previous conditions. Conditions are breach of a condition is liable to a criminal prosecution. So if somebody isn't complying with the condition on the licence under section 136 of the Licensing Act, That is to say where someone has carried on a licensable activity other than in accordance with an authorisation. What that means is if you step outside the framework of your licence in terms of your hours, in terms of the conditions, then you are liable to prosecution, and under those circumstances you could potentially be sent to prison for 6 months. So what you have there is a regulatory framework which is properly enforceable against the holder of a premises licence, because it is right to say that a premises licence, people who hold premises licence enjoy the benefit from that. They, obviously, there are commercial benefits to having a premises licence. That's manifest, that's self-evident, that people who hold licences, otherwise people wouldn't obviously want or need to hold a licence. So of course there are commercial benefits, but that is balanced against the responsibilities that flow from that, responsibilities which, as I say, are potentially subject to criminal prosecution. I would also add to that the fact that the licensing objectives are, of course, the overarching consideration for you, but there's a recognition, and the recognition is there in hope and glory, that licences and licensed premises, there is a balancing exercise to strike. And in this instance, it is the needs of the people who've made representation, and it's right for me to say that a huge number of local residents haven't made any representations. We've not been overwhelmed by representations here. We have effectively 3 representations, and it's right to bear in mind the number of people who haven't objected. But it's right to say that a licence is a balancing exercise between the legitimate concerns that local residents have against the benefit that an event like this will bring to the local area in terms of employment, and in terms of the fact that it's projected or predicted or hoped that there will be 12,500 people in attendance for that weekend, and the benefit that it will provide to those people, and the knock-on benefit of employment and supporting local businesses, and from Mark's point of view, of course, making the farm viable going forward. So, and I would submit respectfully that this application strikes that balance. There are 42 conditions on this licence. I don't propose to go through all of them. I'm sure you'll all be delighted to hear, but that they are extremely comprehensive. They deal with involving the fire service and the security industry authority. They deal with the fact that there has to be a site plan, an event schedule, security and stewarding arrangement, drug and alcohol policy, search policy, child welfare and vulnerability in adults policy, a noise management plan, a traffic management plan, emergency evacuation procedures, electrical and gas installations, sanitary facilities and waste management plan, first aid provision and welfare plan, portable water provision, waste management plan, special effects provision, amusements, food outlet and other concession, major incident planning. And that's just in the event management plan. It's a huge, and perhaps people don't always appreciate. It's not a criticism, but I don't think I appreciated actually until I started practicing in licensing. I've been in the license trade for 20 years, but prior to that, but I never realised what was actually involved in these events. It's a huge undertaking. Of course, it should be. People are coming to your venue. There's a duty of care that you have to provide a safe environment to those people, and this licence does that. Now, look, I could go through these conditions one by one. The reality is, if the responsible authorities who are tasked from a statutory point of view with ensuring public safety for events like this had any concerns about any of these conditions, they would have spoken to me. I didn't have one following the submission of the application. I didn't have any questions raised about this application by any responsible authority: environmental health, the police, children's welfare, the public health, anyone. So I would just make that point that this it has to be on that basis. It's right for you to conclude that all those all those responsible authorities have viewed this as an appropriate and proportionate licence in the circumstances, given the fact it's particularly it's one weekend a year. So, look, I think I'm sure everybody's read the application. I don't need to go through it. Obviously, if anybody's got any questions about that, then I'm more than happy to address those. But what I will do briefly is just go through the supplemental documents, and then I'll deal with the objections themselves. So, as I said at the last hearing, but I'll repeat it now because obviously this is a brand new hearing. These documents were produced in relation to the last application. I think we all know the application or the previous event schedule at the premises. Obviously, a little thing called COVID got in the way, so it never took place. And so, but I wanted to advance these documents just to demonstrate that this wasn't some whimsical, speculative application by Mark and by the company he's director of, and obviously Denise as well. A lot of thought, time, care, and resources have gone into considering this event. Damien, and he's here to answer any questions. Damien, do you want to just briefly just tell them about your background, and then just do that now?
So I was acting as consultant for the previous application, and I kind of put together the event management plan and kind of all of the nuts and bolts that go into delivering an event of this sort of capacity. I've got a great deal of experience. I'm an award-winning promoter, considered as an expert in this field. I've got a long track record of delivering events up to 55,000 people, a whole range of events from corporate events. I've done events all over Europe. I'm very sort of in tune with the right sort of companies and partners in terms of traffic management, security provisions, all of the nuts and bolts, and it's very comprehensive. And I'm still on board with this project, and we've still got the same team of consultants involved with this. It's just that the investors have changed. Obviously, Mark was one of the investors for the previous license that was granted. And really, these documents are active documents. We welcome any kind of feedback. It's not our intention to cause any sort of disruption. We've put various mitigation measures in terms of trying to spread the numbers to avoid the volumes of traffic, and we've been sort of trying to do this as professionally as possible. There's various other consultants that I've brought on board with this project that I've worked with for decades, such as We Are the Fair. They kind of write the manual on a lot of procedures. They're engaged very much with councils in London. So we've kind of amassed a really proficient, comprehensive team that have a long track record of delivering these events. Vanguardia are the market-leading noise consultants as part of the noise management plan. And yeah, essentially these documents, as Duncan's kind of touched upon, they are active and they can be adapted, and we can kind of take people's input from, do you know what I mean, in terms of getting into the details. They're not like a specific Bible, and then we have various other procedures as well, dealing with the local authorities. But, you know, we're all committed to making this as professional as possible, and yeah, we've got a very experienced team to sort of deliver this.
So just going through the documents, and please feel free to chip in if you feel anything's going to help. First, in the supplemental documents is page 1 to 2. You've got traffic management proposal. Clearly, any event like this, there are issues around people when they leave the event. And so that is a document. And yeah, and just to be clear, just to reiterate what Damien said, obviously this will all be part of the SAG process, and responsible authorities and other statutory bodies will have input into all of this. And if there's things within the event management plan or the risk assessment or the traffic management plan,
Mr. Craig, can I just stop your flow? I do apologise. we haven't been given, we've read the documents online, but we're now being given the
Right.
paper ones,
Right.
which we should have done before. Apologies. Just give us a second.
It's all right. No dramas. Look, I'm not going to, as I said at last year, I'm not going to go through them line by line. They are illustrative, but of course you need to have them in front of you. Of course you do. I did say in my email that people will, I did suggest that unless people wanted to read them, they didn't have to. I would just simply, I'm conscious, well, I've not read them. I've gone through the bits that I feel I need to go through, but I've not read them cover to cover. That I don't, frankly, given the fact it's a working and evolving document, I've read what I need to read, but I certainly haven't read them cover to cover. No, I haven't. So you don't need to.
Could I just ask a question of clarification to start with? Is it basically the principles that are contained in this working document that would be converted into conditions if the panel felt fit?
Yes, and if you go back to the application itself, in a sense, the answer to that is yes. If you go to page 27. Of the application, so it's page 27 of the agenda pack, not of the supplemental documents. I'll give you an example why the answer to that is sort of yes, but not directly. So condition 4, an event safety management plan, ESMP, shall be submitted at least 56 days prior to the event. The plan will be agreed with the relevant responsible authorities 28 days prior to the event. In the event that the event safety management plan does not uphold the key licensing objectives, the event management safety plan will not be agreed and the event will not take place. The plan should include but not be limited to, and then it provides that list. So that's the veto. That is a condition, and the simple answer to that is if responsible authorities aren't happy with everything that's in here, and of course that will be subject to change, because the other thing that I said at the last hearing is there aren't going to be events here this year. Nothing is going to happen this year. The first event that if you grant this license, the first time event could take place here is next May, if that was the weekend that the applicant chose. And obviously, under those circumstances, the responsible authorities would have to be happy with what was provided at that time to them. And if they weren't, if one of them's not happy, it ain't happening. So that is the condition that provides as I said, the gateway to everything else. And so that's it. It simply won't happen if the responsible authorities in those circumstances aren't content with what has been provided. So yes, that's a simple answer. So just as I say, go through. You've got a traffic management plan. And again, obviously highways will have some input into that, and if they're not happy with that in terms of the SAG process, then again that will prevent the event taking place. You then have the risk assessment, which is obviously deals with a number of issues. You can see the standard coloured coding, and that's at pages 3 through to 40. I'm going to rip that out so I can move with some dexterity around this. You've then got an event manual. That's at page 41. And just to see how comprehensive it is, well, for a start, it's around 50 pages. It's hugely comprehensive. Let me just take you through, for example, page 47 in the supplemental documents. Got power of command. The people, it's got a management structure there. Festival director, festival manager, overnight manager, site and operations manager, site manager, campsite manager, safety manager, production manager, security manager. These are all matters which are contained within a working document to demonstrate that and make the applicant accountable. That's the other point, that they will be accountable. You've then got to say at 52, reference to the health and safety policy. And that goes into some detail around health and safety rules, general manual handling. 62 deals with fire safety. Obviously, another huge consideration. Page 64 deals with stages and accreditation associated with that. Matters of page 67 around backstage area and site inspection. Hugely important here. Page 69, crowd management. Crime prevention, CCTV. Traffic management is provided for in here as well. Traffic signage plan, that's at page 72. I mean, look, I could be here all day, frankly, going through this. I just hope it even deals with, if you look at page 76, weather monitoring, flooding, extreme heat. You know, what we've got here is an extremely experienced event operator who has provided this management plan that deals with pretty much every oil in oil tanks, chemicals, temporary structures, marquees, gazebos. It covers every conceivable, and obviously you'll have liaised with other event operators in the past, and
These documents have been evolved through many years of trials and tribulations, and being in the trenches delivering these events. It's not just words on the spreadsheet. It's been very well sort of thought out.
I think it's important to turn to page 87 in that regard, because I know concerns have been raised around toilets in some of the objections, or the sewage. I'll turn to that, as I said, in due course. But you see there, at page 87, 88 and 89, deals in some considerable detail with the provision of sanitary facilities and toilets. Referencing the Purple Guide, which is an event, a guide that's often deployed in relation to events. Water management and waste management are also provided for in there too. So that is a hugely comprehensive document. You've also then got, and I think this is equally important in relation to the objections, at page 96, a noise management plan. There is a requirement, again, under the licence that there's a noise management plan. And as part of the SAG process, Safety Advisory Group process, premises will be required to satisfy environmental health that there won't be an unreasonable level of intrusion into the objectors' lives for that weekend. There is a code called the POP code, which is still applied to outdoor events, which works out essentially what a reasonable level of intrusion is, and that is generally based around the hours, obviously, but also the number of days a year. So it's widely accepted if certain residential properties are subject to 3 days of an event nearby, that it is accepted that there can be a greater level of noise produced for 3 events than, let's say, for example, if there were 12 days a year. There's a ratio that they use and is deployed by environmental health, and environmental health will do that. They will look at this plan. They'll look at the siting of the speakers. They'll look at the location of the speakers. They'll look at the amount of noise being generated through the amplified music systems. We'll visit the neighbouring properties, and we'll essentially again have power of veto if they feel that there's going to be an unreasonable level of intrusion into the objectors' lives off the back of this weekend event. So again, that is another layer of protection that local residents have, and I'm sure they've demonstrated to me, and I'm sure everybody else, that they are not shy of stridently asserting their wish to represent their own interests, and I'm sure that they will do that with environmental health, and those discussions will be ongoing. So, yeah, Gusco.
Just want to note, Vanguardia will be actively monitoring the sound levels as well, so it's not a case of just leaving it to EHO. The consultants will be on site, they'll be going to the residents, they'll be taking the readings, and sometimes with these noise it gets quite technical. It depends on cloud formation, where the wind's blowing, it can kind of affect the levels. So we'll have an active monitoring process to manage any complaints. It's common practice to then go to that premises and potentially adjust the levels. Do you know what I mean? You can adjust certain frequencies. It gets very scientific. That's why we need Vanguardia on board. But they would be there for the whole weekend, monitoring and making sure we're within the guidelines. So it wouldn't be a case of us pushing it and hoping that EHO don't get away with it. We'll keep a record of the levels, and we'll kind of have an active management policy on the day, which we manage ourselves.
And it's right to say all of that will be required under the licence. So it'll be again a requirement. So if that doesn't happen, it's a breach of a condition, and accordingly makes the applicant liable to prosecution. So again, I'm hoping I'm conveying to everybody here that this is an ongoing process of vigilance over an event like this, of course, given the number of people that are visiting and what's at stake. So you then have on page 114, you have an operating schedule, which again just provides a overriding framework. And again, Damien, do you just want to talk briefly about the operating schedule?
The operating schedule, basically, it's a very basic overview of what the licence conditions are, which again all feeds into the event safety management plan. But as Duncan's alluded to, there is the SAG meeting which comes off the back of this. There are various measures that it's not just a case of you get the keys and you can just proceed. We would welcome kind of any feedback, any input. If there's any concerns, you know, it's not a case of we're trying to set everything in stone. If there's other elements that might have been missed or things we haven't considered, we'd welcome that, because we're trying to be as professional and as kind of as good as we can. But really, the operating schedule is just it's just a basic overview which feeds into the licence. Yeah.
At page 121, you've got the medical services plan. Obviously, for an event like this, there would need to be ambulances on site, as a matter of course. Obviously, all paid for by the event themselves. Thank you. Just ask you to turn, if I could, to page 129. I've not had any conversations with the objectors since the last hearing. I did invite them to do that. I'll turn to that shortly. But I've understood this morning that there have been some discussions between my client and one of the objectors, and some concern has been raised. If you look on that plan there, there's an area that says you've got a green line. So it says VIP camping and artist park, sort of top right. I don't know, 2 o'clock on a clock. VIP camping and artist parking. My understanding this morning is that that is actually land that is now owned by Mr. Marshall. And so, whilst I can't amend the plan here, you could either condition this, or I will give an undertaking to submit a minor variation that will exclude that from the licensable area. So that bit there with the green line, you've got a green line that goes up and then to the left. Well, listen, why don't I do that?
I'm afraid we're watching the snooker in black and white.
Okay. Well, why don't I actually... Yeah. I've circled it. I can, for the purposes of today, if I can get another copy. So I've got this here. I will hatch that so that is, for the purposes of today, that is then excluded from the licensable area, should you be minded to grant this. Okay. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah. It's basically just the VIP capital and artists.
Yeah. Well, let's do it on that, yeah. So, look, I am entitled to, on behalf of my client, amend the application as long as it's more onerous to them, not in their favour, for obvious reasons. I couldn't suddenly say I want 4 in the morning, because obviously people, but there is there is case law to support the fact that can happen. So I have done. So if I hand that in, the area that I have hatched in my. In fact, why don't I do that? There we go. The area that I've identified in orange will be excluded from the licensable area. I think you can properly move forward on that basis. And we'll also say there will be an amended plan submitted. I mean, this has all been last minute. I had the conversation 2 minutes before we came in. But if I hand that forward... Okay. So that will be excluded. I mean, obviously, it's Mr. Marshall's land. I think he's only recently acquired it, although I'm sure he'll be able to speak for himself. But that'll be excluded from the plan, and an amended application will be amended plan will be submitted on that basis.
On this part of this paperwork where they've put artist parking, that actual artist parking doesn't belong to us. That actually belongs to Dale Leach. I spoke with Mr. Leach. At the weekend, or before that, and explained that his land was put down as part of their festival, to which I believe he's now put an official complaint into the council, and I know that he's spoken to Mark Wells about it, because he wasn't happy that they'd actually just took it on their back and used other people's land. The VIP parking, nobody's ever actually contacted us. We just got a piece of paper showing us that's our paddock land. And I'm pretty sure that these people are totally aware of this land being ours. So we were a little bit shocked when we first found out that they'd used our land as part of their festival. So I just thought I'd let you know that artist parking is not to do with us. That's to do with Dale Leach.
Forgive me, sorry, I got my wires slightly crossed. It is Mr. Leach's land, but it is that area that I've identified. In fact, Mr. Leach, as I understand it, approached my client and said that he wouldn't have any issues if that was withdrawn from the application. Is that right? Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. So I misunderstood. I misunderstood it was Mr. Marshall's land. It's not. It's Mr. Leach's land. But the principle is the same. It is removed from the application. It was done in error. It was, and certainly no desire to have a licensable area that goes onto anybody else's land. So accordingly, the application is amended to that extent. So I'll then ask you to turn, if I may, to page 131. This is the old premises licence, which was held by Western Lawns Festival Limited, and still is. As we said, so if you look at the hours, let's just sale of alcohol, for example. That's right, Friday, 1400 to... This is at page 132. at 1400 it commences, and on this application it starts at 11. But other than that, it's identical in terms of the hours. And then you can see there at page 134 through to 144, there are 54 conditions. But as I said, I've consolidated some of them, and some of them duplicated other conditions. So just tidied it up, but essentially it serves the same purpose as this license. So, I mean, look, my client potentially could transfer this license into this company's name, and but he just wanted a clean break. It's as simple as that. That's why we're here today. It really is as simple as that, and so that's, as I say, why we find ourselves here today. Just turn now, if I may, to the objections, which are contained. Mr. Marshall's is at page 35. Thank you. This is where I start getting. So, first of all, all the objections have made reference to alcohol being sold at the site. Well, it is sold at the site. There's another premises license in place. There is, so if you look, if the site itself, in fact, if I just ask you to turn, sorry to take you back to page 129. Where's the bar, the conference centre, yeah. The bit below the VIP camping is a conference centre. That is what is presently licensed. So this is not the licence that's in the supporting documents. There is another premises licence that is held by another company that Mark is the director of, and it's basically it's a function suite. It has a bar, and so when the equestrian centre is used, alcohol is sold from there through that premises licence. Again, that's perfectly normal, and so the suggestion that they're selling alcohol without an authorisation is simply wrong. They have an authorisation. I think it's till midnight for the sale of alcohol, and so any suggestion that they're carrying on licensable activities there without an authorisation, without a premises licence in place, is simply wrong. They are, and there's no suggestion they're not operating that licence in accordance with its conditions and its hours. Absolutely none. So just make that point. In terms of Mr. Marshall's, some of the specifics that he mentions, well, first of all, he talks about, I mean, we don't have any complaints, or we're not aware of any complaints to environmental health whatsoever about the site. We've certainly not had any contact from environmental health in terms of the use of the conference area, and so from our point of view, we don't believe there is any nuisance.
Are you happy to take questions as you do your presentation?
If it's a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just make a comment just to rewind? You talk about the licence that you've got in place. I think I mentioned before, you said you'd had it for several years. All of us, going back to our objections, didn't know about this. At the time when this was put through, and apparently the letters were put on the lampposts, which is what you do, we didn't know about. So that was in COVID time, so he's talking like we don't know about that.
Can I just say that during the presentation, we need to be asking questions. Don't apologise. No, it's fine. But you need to be asking specific questions on the point made. You'll have all your opportunities to make your points. Okay.
I think it's probably best that I clarify, because I think there's a bit of confusion here. This is an application here for a weekend event, one weekend a year. That is essentially the same as another premises license for a weekend event a year. But in addition to that, there is another premises license that just deals with the the equestrian centre itself, the conference centre itself, that can sell alcohol 365 days a year till I think it's midnight. It's authorised, like you would have at a village hall or a conference suite or a function suite. It's along those lines. It's an on-licence, it's a premises licence, and so that can be used all year round. So that is separate, and I understand that's been in situ for no, in fact 2018, because it burnt down, didn't it? So you applied for a new one on the new site because it's two floors. So since 2018, that's been in situ. So there wouldn't have been a requirement for the same number of notices to be put up for that, because it doesn't cover the same square footage, square meterage. So just to make that point, and you know, I have to make this point. I was more than willing, and I offered on 3 separate occasions. So I firstly sent emails to the objectors inviting to either meet them or to have a Teams or a Zoom meeting with them to explain all of this to them. I then followed that up because they all rejected it. I mean, in one instance, very curtly, was rejected, the offer. Look, some people are perhaps intimidated by legal professionals. I don't think there's a more approachable lawyer in the country than me. I'll say that now. I'll meet with anybody, and I'll happily take time out in an evening or a weekend to explain an application to an objector. If I think it's going to help iron the issues out. And I did that once via an email to the objectors. All of them rejected it within a very short period of time. I then reiterated it through your through Julie, because I didn't want to start getting into the territory of hassling them. But I said to Julie, to Mr. Marshall, I'm happy to meet him following the service of the documents. I said it's probably best it comes through you, and that was again rejected to meet me and discuss this application and the surrounding facts and circumstances. And then once again here at the last hearing, I once again extended that hand of friendship out, and I've not had any contact from any of them. So for anyone to say we didn't know this and we didn't know that, well, if you'd had a meeting with me, I would have happily told you all that I'm saying here today. But what I'm not going to do as a legal professional is start getting to the territory of harassing people and constantly emailing them. I've made that offer on 3 separate occasions because my client wanted me to. My client wanted to try and have a dialogue there, and it was rejected out of hand. So, look, nobody's obliged to meet with me. Nobody's obliged to enter into any dialogue at all. But for people to say, well, we didn't know this. Well, if you'd had a meeting with me, you'd know. You'd have known because I'd have told you. So I have to make that point because my client has all the way through this said, if we can have a meeting with these objectors and sort it out. Obviously, I didn't get to see them till quite late in the proceedings because, as I've said on the last occasion, I'm busy and I have to do things as they come into my purview. But that offer was there, and it was extended on 3 separate occasions, and it was rejected on 3 separate occasions. So I feel compelled to make that point in the interests of fairness here. Reference has been made by Mr. Marshall to a screen that's there. Yes, there is a screen that's there. That's been erected by my client. They were under no obligation to do that. There was it wasn't that Environmental Health suggested that. You just felt that was an appropriate thing to do. That screen. What's it made of? The screen? You've got a screen, haven't you? Is it?
What's reference?
You've got a screen, haven't you, between you and the residential property?
Yeah, green.
Yeah. Make reference. There's reference in here to the sewerage. I mean, look, as you can see, there's extensive provision in the operating schedule and the other documents for Portaloos and matters along those. But what the current, I mean, it's not accepted that the sewerage isn't adequate at the moment. In fact, bear me a sec, 'cause I'm having to. The Bedworth and Nuneaton Council carried out an investigation this year on the farm in relation to the sewage, and they did not recommend any remedial action at all in relation to that. Okay. Yeah, my client's been in dialogue with the Environmental Agency as well, and they've not raised any concerns about the site. So just make that point. Reference has also been made to the burning of rubbish in not just this representation, but other representations. Well, look, my client, the position is they don't burn waste after an event or whenever they put any question events on. They have a contract in place with Tom White's and have done for many years, and have waste transfer notes. They spend £15,000 a year to dispose of their waste in a lawful and compliant manner. The notion that this premises is well, there's just no evidence to support that. And in actual fact, you can see that they take their legal responsibilities extremely seriously in respect of that. And I mean, again, I'm not sure it's necessarily relevant to this. The burning of rubbish is necessarily relevant to this application, given it's a weekend and there is provision within there for the disposal of waste. But I felt compelled to make that point on behalf of my client. They're not brazenly burning rubbish in an unlawful fashion. They are disposing of their waste in a lawful fashion and are paying £15,000 a year to do so. Then go on to make the point, suggestion from Mr. Marshall, the company's dormant. I've never seen it dormant. I looked when I put the application in. I always go onto company's house. It wasn't dormant then. It wasn't dormant last time I checked. I don't think there's any reason a dormant company can't hold a license, but it isn't dormant. The company's not dormant. So from that point of view, I don't agree. So you got something to say about that? Or? Right, I understand. It was dormant at one point, but certainly not at any point during this process. It isn't dormant now. It wasn't dormant when the application was made, which is really what we're dealing with. So, from that point of view, that's the position. And there's reference to Mr. Marshall's objection about the notice. Well, we've liaised with your licensing authority on that, and we took a number of photos. How many did you put up?
I can't remember those.
50 odd? 6? Okay, right.
The full perimeter.
Full perimeter, every 50 metres, photographs were taken and sent to your licensing authority. So, and clearly, if they were not satisfied with the advertising of this application, then we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here today. So that's Mr. Marshall's objection. Again, Mr. and Mrs. Cole making strident assertions that they're selling alcohol without permission. That's not correct. It says it comes as no surprise to them. Well, I presume it came as a surprise that there was a licence in place. There's some reference to Andrew Snowden here. We've not had any contact from any Andrew Snowden, have we? From Environmental Health? No. Absolutely no contact from him whatsoever. And then Mr. and Mrs. Leach, as I've said, we've dealt with. I think our understanding is Mr. and Mrs. Leach. A concern was in relation to that licensable area, but I can't speak for Mr. and Mrs. Leach, obviously. So, but certainly, again, they reiterate the same issues around the use of the sale of alcohol at the premises presently under the premises license that I referred to, and again reference to sewage. So just to be clear, no festival wants to have a situation where there is inadequate toilet facilities. I mean, it's about the worst thing that can happen. So from that point of view, you have somebody here who's extremely experienced, so it can be said with absolute confidence that there won't be any issues around the toilet facilities in relation to this event. So I've gone on for some time, but I could have gone on for a lot longer. I could. But if responsible authorities were here, then that may have been necessary. But in this instance, what is key, and what my overriding submissions are that this is a license to replace a like-for-like one that's already there. That, quite frankly, if my client wanted to transfer it into his company name, he could, but he wants a clean break. So you're replacing like-for-like. My understanding is that that license has been suspended because the annual fee hasn't been paid, which is perfectly proper, by the way, but that could be reactivated at any time if the fee was paid. And you have here a hugely comprehensive, not only application, but ancillary supporting documents, working documents. And if you are granting this license today, no events are going to take place here. Not one is going to take place until every statutory body is happy that it's going to be done in a way that's safe, that isn't going to impact negatively upon the neighbouring properties in a disproportionate way. And that would include noise intrusion as well. And so for those reasons, I would respectfully submit there is no good reason to refuse this application as it stands. And so that is the presentation, but obviously I suspect there'll be a number of questions for myself and my clients, and we're happy to take any of those from anywhere in the room. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I understand the committee has the first question, so I have one. I don't know if any of the panel have any, but the fencing. Can you just talk us through the fencing? Because I think one of the concerns is antisocial behaviour spilling out into the local community. I know it's bounded by a railway line on one side, but yeah, what we're talking about.
So it's quite common practice for any festival to have a comprehensive fencing system in place, which will be steel shield. Without getting too technical, it's a certain level of meters high. I think it's 2.5 meters. It will also be secured by our security provider, G4S, manned by CCTV. So there will be a fence line in place, which is, as per any major large public event. They call it steel shield, basically. It's the big steel, normally green in colour. And then that will also be manned by a security patrol, CCTV, looking at the access points. We'll make sure it's a very secure compound, basically.
Thank you. Could I just ask if the access process is likely to end up going halfway up the road, basically? I mean, is there a plan to contain the queuing people within the property off the road?
So vehicles or people?
Both.
So basically, we're working with Saltum, which is a local traffic management company. They work quite closely with the council. We took them on board because with traffic management, it's better to have someone in the local area. So they'll be providing a much more comprehensive traffic management plan. Part of that strategy is to open doors and have staggered hours so that you kind of spread the flow of traffic. Obviously, with social media now, it's quite easy to communicate with ticket buyers and kind of advise certain ticket elements will come in at certain times. So that eliminates a lot of the issues. And then we'll obviously publicise. I think part of Les from Saltum, his strategy was also to put signs up to notify the local residents when it's going to be busy, and I think part of it is managing the volume of when people are going to turn up, and then literally as soon as they're within the compound, there's adequate facilities in terms of various car parks, there's multiple roads, we've planned access routes for emergency access. So for example, if an ambulance needs to leave while people are arriving, there's separate routes, and again, these are active documents. Will correspond with the local traffic planning authority and EHO, and all of the accreditation will take place on site and we'll have a full stewarding plan, a dedicated team that will manage the traffic. Also looking at if somebody's broken down, we'll have like a response team. So for example, if somebody's battery dies or whatever, we can act on that. So yeah, we'll take as many measures as we can to sort of have as minimal impact on the local area.
I think it's important to note as well, when you access the site at Western Lawns, there are 2 400 to 500 metre driveways, and beyond which there's quite extensive areas for, as Damien said, managing the parking of the vehicles and giving people the passes, etc. So it's not as soon as you pull into the site, you know, there's 500 metre tracks either side.
There's also quite a long road. So one of the strategies was to get the queuing within our site almost, rather than queuing on the road. So I can't be specific on how much measurements they are, but we calculated it, and we feel like the majority of the queuing will take place within our compound, because there's if you can imagine, it's almost like there's a massive long channel which can take a large volume of traffic. But again, just to reiterate, it's also making sure that when people turn up and it's kind of phased and it's not everybody arriving en masse at the same time, and that's something that we'll be addressing.
Okay, so is there an early assessment on numbers of vehicles? Could you say it's going to be probably 4,000 over 6 hours, or is there any sort of norm for this sort of size event?
But for a camping event, it's normally there's normally per 2.8 people as a metric. Obviously in this case, and that's for a greenfield site in the middle of nowhere, in this case we have got the train station down the road, and we'll be encouraging a lot of people on public transport. We're also doing deals with coach companies as well. And obviously the good thing about the coach is we can time when they come onto site. Getting into the specifics of volumes of traffic, that's something that Salton would have to engage with, but it's something that we would manage as part of our plans. We'd be looking at sort of volumes, access routes, and they're the experts on it essentially.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, don't forget that first of all, the hours have been slightly extended at the beginning of the event, so that perhaps makes a bigger spread. But of course, 12,500 is the limit. If it's less, for any reason, say it's 10,000, then obviously that will have a bearing on the number of cars. So it's difficult to answer with any certainty at this stage, given we don't know how many tickets are going to be sold. But certainly, I hope Damien has gone some way to. There were huge contingency plans, and it will be managed in as efficient and undisruptive way as possible.
Okay, on the tickets element, I think my partner here has got a question.
Yeah, could you explain what sort of music or what this festival is actually going to be entertainment-wise?
So it's on the previous application. It was kind of a pop indie crossover student event, very much sort of targeted towards sort of. I think that for this license it was sort of 18 to 30. Do you know what I mean? That sort of date range. Sometimes if you go a bit younger than that, you can have a few more problems. We normally find 18 plus is, it's a safe sort of demographic to work with. We had artists. We were talking to Billie Eilish at one point. We were talking to Craig David. It's very commercial, mainstream, student-based artists. And something that, that would never normally come to Bedworth, would come to the local area, So it was going to be quite a special thing, and, we intend to deliver on that. So when we put the initial application in, we actually had a specific talent list. It's obviously difficult now because we're looking at next year. We don't know who we're going to book. But previously it was, Billie Eilish, and what's the name? George Ezra. It was very, very commercial pop stuff mixed with, student 18 to 30 demographic, basically, which we find is low risk. And that's kind of the reason why we wanted to go for that.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of more technical questions. You've spoken about noise monitoring. Can I just clarify, is that in relation to the music output, or will there be monitoring across the site for crowd noise, etc.?
I believe the noise management plan considers both. In terms of managing the people, that's more of a security issue, i.e. at a certain time of the campsite, you want people to be quiet, and it's a bit more difficult because you're trying to control the public at that point. But the noise management, as far as I understand from a sort of licensing perspective, the regulated entertainment is normally what causes the most issues, and that's kind of... They're both in focus, but rather than Vanguardia monitoring that, it's more of a security issue and more of a manpower issue, making sure, look, guys, pipe down a little bit. We're after a certain time. 11 p.m. is normally the cut-off point. So after, although we're going for 2 a.m., the idea was at 11, the outdoor stage closes, everything migrates to the furthest proximity of the site, which is an indoor big top tent. The levels are then pumped down significantly because it's after 11 p.m. that there's like a noise curfew, so to speak. So it's not a case of just, roll into 2 a.m. It's an active process. And also Led Zeppelin created the idea of the headliner being turned up slightly louder. So when the headliner's performing, they'll be slightly louder, but it's all within the levels. So it's not like there's a consistent level and we just roll in till 2 a.m. We're very sort of we're very selective in terms of making sure that we're within the kind of legal parameters with noise management, basically, in EHO.
Sorry, just one more. Again, a more technical question. Obviously, there's concerns about waste management on the site. Your client's spoken about existing waste management that they have currently. Do they anticipate that their current arrangements will meet the requirements of the event, or will something additional need to be put into place?
So part of the waste management policies will employ a specialist, and we'll have portaloos, we'll have a waste disposal policy. So ultimately, we're not going to be plugging into the infrastructure that's already there. It's almost treating it as if we're setting up camp almost. And then you have certain times, for example, you can only empty the portaloos before the event starts, and you can have different areas. Obviously, you don't just rely on one section in case there's a flooding issue or whatnot. So you have various sort of waste points, which is managed by a waste company, and they'll come and empty the portaloos at certain specific times. And we're treating it so we don't, as if we're just going into a field in the middle of nowhere, basically.
Okay, so that's the application complete. We've asked our questions. You now have an opportunity to ask your own questions, and then after that, we'll move on to your presentations. Okay, so any questions from any of the individual objectors to start with, and you can address them.
Right, going back to the beginning, when they said about this is to raise money for the poor Mr. Farmer. Mr. Farmer is already raising loads of money from the activities they're already doing and causing major disruption to us that we've tolerated for quite a while. This includes lorries running in and out 24 hours a day, buses running in and out 24 hours a day, coach and scrap people going in and out. Now they've got a concrete plant up there. Do you think this is really acceptable? Why do we have to put up with this? I've been there 35 years, and all of a sudden, it's just getting totally out of hand. And the other thing is, I did have a meeting with Mark, Mr. Wells, on the drive about the event centre, and he assured me there would be no noise from that event centre because it's all soundproofed. We have nothing but noise from that event centre, and there's cars...
Sorry, I'm going to have to stop you. Because you're actually presenting your case.
Well,
you're preventing your... Hang on.
This is
there
what
is a
we're up
process.
against.
There is a process. Please, do you have any questions on the evidence and the submission that we've heard up to now? You'll get your chance to say all of that, sir, I promise. But there is a process we have to go through. any individual questions, not comments, not statements, questions on what we've heard?
Yeah, one question. When the people come on site, will they remain on site or will they be free to leave and come at any time of the day?
Yeah, well, look, we're not going to tie them up to radiators. If they want to go, they can go. But the general idea is that they will be there for the duration of the weekend. They'll be camping there. So most people, the vast majority, we would expect to turn up on the Friday and leave on the Sunday and not leave the site at any point. Would that be fair?
We're not allowing pass-outs, so if they leave, they leave. It's not a case if they can go and... Do you know what I mean? So normally we try and enforce no pass-outs.
Yeah, you say that, but obviously the camping forum, they have to go across the public road to get to the camping. So how can you police them coming in and out? You've got the archery field, which is over the other way. And also there's public footpaths go across the land. How can they be blocked off?
I believe what you're referring to is the event staff camping area. Is that what we're referring to across the road? Yeah, so that's not for the public, basically. That's just for staff. Make sure we're looking at the right. There. Yeah, but again, that's right. Yeah, I see what we're referring to now. Sorry, I got confused where the road was. Again, that's for people to camp down during the event, and basically it's a limited number of people that. I mean, I think we agreed a certain amount of capacity for people with static caravans and not static, but mobile caravans and whatnot. So we would be policing that. So if there's any pass outs, but again, the focus is for them to sort of remain on site and not be passing back and forth too much, because the campsite is essentially for people that are staying overnight. It's not like there's not going to be any regulated entertainment. It's literally for people to sort of bed down. But it's a limited capacity and it's only for caravans. So.
Yeah, but will they be coming and going out of the event, though? That's what I'm trying to say.
Only for at the end of the event. So it's not like it's part of the event. Yeah, that's what I mean. At the end of each day, they would only be going there to stay at the end. So it's almost like when the doors close, that's when they'll go over. But again, it's a limited capacity.
The thrust of the question was people leaving the venue itself. I mean, it's part of the venue. It's been identified within the red line. So, in terms of that, yeah, they would be back and forth. But the question was in relation to people leaving the event itself and going into Bedworth or Nuneaton. And what Damien is saying to that is, in those circumstances, people will not be given a pass out. If they leave, they leave. Thank you.
Can I just say, the overspill of the traffic management, if there's queues and queues, it says in there that you will take them into the field where the archery field. If there's an overspill, if there's caravans and camper vans and that's the camping field, how are you going to manage the overspill? Oh, sorry.
Within that field, there's an area, you kind of have a contingency area. You shouldn't have to use it, but it's always good to have a contingency. So imagine if you have the field, you split a certain area off. And to this day, I've never had to use a contingency field, but it's there just in place, as a measure, as a safety measure.
But we're talking about Bedworth here. It's a small community. The roads, to Bulkington to Bedworth, and you're getting 12,500 people come in. One road.
Within the site, there's plenty of space. There's the surrounding fields, so we don't anticipate any issue with capacity. We've been very kind of safe with that, but again, we had the resource there available to us, so we said, okay, we'll just keep that as a contingency. It's not part of the plan. It's not a formative part of the plan. We don't anticipate any issue with it, but it was there. It was just worth having. It's not a case of we're relying on it. There's plenty of capacity within those fields for everything that needs to be provisioned for that amount of people. And initially, for the initial application, we were actually looking for a larger number of people, but we corresponded with the authorities at the time. We said, look, well, let's curb this down to 12.5. So as a site, you could get significantly more, but we're trying to be safe with this, and we don't want to push it too far for the sake of it.
Oh, there we go. When we sell the tickets online, all ticket purchases will be made online. Those purchasers of those tickets will also need to register their vehicle. So well in advance, we will have numbers of how many vehicles are going to attend the festival over the 3-day period, and we can plan well in advance as a result of that information.
Can I just go back to where we said the camping and caravan is, which is across the actual main road, which is the 50 mile an hour. People are going to come out of the event at the end of the night. They're going to cross the road into that field. How safe is that going to be? Because we've lived there for 30 years and we know how many fatalities have been on that road. How do you say they're going to go across in safety if they've had drink or, like a mass into that field to go to sleep at the end of the night? I just wondered if there was going to be any safety in aspects of that road, because it is a dangerous road, isn't it? We all know that.
It's a very valid point, and essentially we would have a stewarding team that would manage that, also in liaison with security, and it's a very limited number of people that would be in that field. Also, kind of approaching the event as part of the traffic management policy would have slow down, signage, cones, to sort of let people be aware that there is a sort of a festival entrance or it's in process. So that would be a conversation for Saltham as part of his traffic management plan, but it would be well signed and people would be aware, and it would also be policed with a stewarding team and security. But it is a very valid point.
At the moment, you say about all of the toiletries and the sewerage, etc., etc. But at this moment in time, Mr. Wells isn't even capable of sorting out the sewerage system, which is there in place already. We've put quite a few complaints in. So,
questions only at this point.
How are they going to deal with it? Because at this moment in time, we have sewerage already being dumped into the land. And that's now without 12,000 people turning up. We're going to have people doing all sorts of stuff all over the place there.
As we kind of touched on before, we'd have a self-contained waste management policy, so it would be portaloos, they would be emptied at certain points, there'd be certain... So essentially, we wouldn't be plugging into any of the resources, blocking up any drains. It's almost as if assume there was no sewage system at all, we're treating it on that basis. So it would all be basically contained within portaloos, which were then emptied at certain points through the event.
I think compelled to respond as well. We don't accept there's a sewage issue at our end, do we? Go on, please, thanks.
There we go. Yeah, some concerns have been raised about the sewage management on site. They were raised, I believe, back in April. Mark spoke to the authorities about that, and the authorities were quite satisfied. But 2 days ago, and it's highly likely as a result of this hearing, the Environment Agency got in touch with Mark with a view to understanding, one, what type of septic tank there is on the farm, and two, is it fit for purpose? Okay, so Mark is liaising with the EA on that, and at the same time has acknowledged that there is a problem on site, and as such, he's looking to invest in a new septic tank, which hopefully will resolve any problems that it's caused you guys.
Does that end the questions on the application and what we've heard through the presentation? If it does, we can move on to the second stage now, where you actually present your own individual arguments. So please do arrange it amongst yourselves who speaks first, and please do go ahead.
Obviously, what is being proposed here is a huge increase in activity beyond anything that's ever occurred before. As you know, I told you at the last meeting we had that we've only been there since August last year. We actually moved on the 27th of August. And so we're not aware of anything that went on in earlier years. And certainly weren't aware of the premises license that already existed. In looking at the application that's made, I personally detect a certain cavalier approach to it. And I'll speak more about that as I go on. First of all, the applicant's name is given as Mark Wells. But in the signage that was put up on the lampposts, the applicant's name was given as Western Lawns Farm Limited, which is why I addressed my objection on that basis. It might seem a minor point, but it points to a certain approach to regulations and rules.
Is applying, you have to nominate an individual, an officer of the company, who is essentially the person who could be liable to prosecution if there's any false statement in association with that application. And so under the section it says applicant's name, I am required to nominate a director or the secretary of the company as that nominated individual on behalf of the company. That is what I'm required to do. If I didn't nominate that individual, the application form would be invalid. So that was why Mr. Wells' name was on there. That's simply a requirement of the form.
As I've said, we've been there just over 11 months now, and this came as a bit of a surprise. But when we looked at the detail of it, I mean, quite apart from the item I've just dealt with, obviously when we looked at the plan, which is Appendix D, we noticed immediately that some acreage of our land was actually penned out as part of the site that was to be used for the festival. And I think it's important to look at what has gone on in the past, because while there's been a great deal of paper presented to you, it wasn't presented as part of the application. It came because of the objections. And it's all very well writing things down in paper, and a lot of the words used are very encouraging. But my question is, will they be carried out? Because quite frankly, up to now, in the 11 months that we've lived there, we've found Western Lawns not a particularly good neighbour. The question of the sewage has been finally admitted this morning, despite the fact that it's been denied on numerous occasions during the course of these hearings. And the stench that comes off it at times is really quite terrible. Now, if somebody's going to adopt that sort of attitude to really a basic question, a basic consideration in my view, what is going to be their attitude to other things that will crop up as a result of suddenly going from events which cater for a couple of hundred people to an event which might cater for 12,500 people? Now, you've had some figures put before you about the number of people and how many of them might come by car. And actually, the number of cars that's suggested exceeds the total number envisaged for the event, only by 100, admittedly. But it just shows you how these figures can suddenly escalate, and what control will there be. Obviously, the licensing authority yourselves can put in place conditions, and I shall come to that shortly. But when you look through the supporting document, which arrived 2 days before the start of these hearings, it says in very fine words that they support public transport, and they talk about shuttle buses and coaches coming and so on. Well, it's something that interests me very, very greatly, because I spent my entire working life in public transport, and I know how long it takes to unload a coach and what happens when it stands at the entrance or exit to a venue, which is what is envisaged here, and how much chaos it can cause. And I honestly think that to go suddenly from catering to 200 or 300 people to catering to 12,500, which may not be an accurate figure, actually, is really a huge step to take at once, particularly as there are a lot of issues about the way things have been managed up to date. I'm not really aware of all the supplementary activities on the site, which we've heard about from Mr. Cole, but I can see from what does go on that at times there isn't much control. At times the amount of noise that's made after midnight and light displays and things of that nature can be very disturbing. And I've discovered during the course of this process that I'm not alone. You heard that the applicant tried to introduce 3 letters of support today, and eventually their counsel said, well, they weren't of any matter, so it didn't occur. But I've discovered during the last few weeks that there's a vast amount of antipathy to the activities that go on at Western Lawns by people whom I wouldn't have believed would actually have been able to hear it.
We didn't interrupt you. We didn't interrupt you when you were speaking. We gave
Mark,
you 45 minutes.
Please.
Carry on, Mr. Marshall, now.
I've made the point now, so I will carry on. In view of what's gone on, as I've said, and the way things have been managed, they're fully set out in my letter. I don't really want to go through them all again, but I still adhere to them. I think I'm accurate and fair in what I've said. I really think that, first of all, I don't believe that the setup at Western Lawns has proved itself sufficiently to be allowed the leeway to grow enormously in one leap, firstly, and therefore that the licence application should be rejected at this stage. But secondly, if you're minded to grant an application, I think it should be severely curtailed. First of all, by reducing the number of attendees to something like 5,000, and reducing the hours so that all things that are likely to cause a noise finish at 11 p.m., which is, I understand, the case in festivals in various places. I gather that even at Glastonbury, which was referred to earlier, the cut-off time there is 11 p.m. And certainly events that take place at what used to be the Rico Arena, and I can't think of it as anything else, I think the cut-off point there is 11:15, if I'm not mistaken. But I certainly think that first of all, for the reasons I've stated, the application should be put on hold to see how things go, particularly with this new cesspit that's going to be introduced, apparently. But if you are minded to make an application, it should be of a much more, grant a license rather, it should be of a much more restricted nature. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, can I invite any questions of Mr. Marshall? Can we be brief if we have them? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Who's speaking next? Anyone speaking next?
I personally think that the actual traffic and chaos this is going to cause on our lives outside our homes is going to be absolutely horrendous. The noise and everything else, I don't think it's fair that us as three neighbours should be put through it. At night, the noise is bad enough as it is. Do you really think, if you've even got 5,000 people coming out of a venue, they're going to be quiet? They're going to be peeing all over the place. They ain't going to worry about using Portaloos. They're just going to stop. They'll pull up by our fence or our gates, and they'll just pee up them, because that's what people are like. And having an event like this in that area, I think, is a no-no.
Any questions of Mr. Bigger? Thank you, Mr. Bigger. Any other comments or?
Yes, we've already been through this. Last year, or whenever it was, the football, I had people coming down the drive, climbing over my fence, peeing up the fence and causing a major disturbance. I spoke to Mark Wells on this and he said, Dave, he says, it'll never happen again. I will never do that again. He said it was a big mistake. He said, we won't do that again. And now we've got to contend with this. They're constantly having events up there, which run into the early hours of the mornings. There's cars racing up and down the drive. There's people screaming and shouting. There's car doors slamming to the early hours of most mornings over the weekends. And I've put up with enough, and I won't put up anymore. And unfortunately, it's going to cause a big rift. And I don't want that, and I'm sure Mr. Wells doesn't want it, because he stood on his drive and said to me, Dave, I can assure you, you'll hear no noise from this event centre whatsoever. He said it's all soundproofed. We hear nothing but noise from this event centre till the early hours of the morning. And also, we've got the constant noise of traffic going in and out, which is lorries, buses, scrap people. Now there's concrete. So unfortunately, Mr. Poor Farmer that hasn't got any money and he needs all the money he can get is now absolutely disrupting our lives. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to go to the transport and complain about it, which will curtail vehicles coming in and out of the premises at unearthly hours. And this is how it's going to be. It's going to be a real bitter fight. And I'm sure Mr. Wells and all the people that go up there don't want that. If I start complaining, people will have to listen. And I don't want that. So I urge them to not go ahead with this festival whatsoever, because it's just not acceptable for me, nor my family, at any cost whatever. And it will cause bitterness and disruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from Mr. Cole?
I don't have a question, Mr. Cole. I think Denise wants to respond to what was said in relation to Mark.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to thank Mr. Marshall, who 2 weeks ago brought it to our attention, I might add for the first time, an issue with noise and light pollution coming from the conference centre. As a result of that, we've invested in very expensive draping along the balcony of the building, and at 10 o'clock at night, if there's an event on upstairs, we close the doors and do not allow access to those balconies. I'd also like to add that what we're hearing today, we're hearing for the first time in some cases. Now, given we've got a website, Our telephone number is at the front of the premises. We've got 3 email addresses, and it goes back to Duncan's point earlier about dialogue. Mark is a member of the local community as well, and has been for 63 years. And he does take offence, if you will, when it's suggested that he has a cavalier attitude and doesn't necessarily care about its local community in Bedworth and Bulkington. So I just feel if dialogue about the running of the equestrian centre, not though it's pertinent to this application, but even so, it just makes for a better relationship. So Mr. Cole mentions and suggests that Mark is an incredibly wealthy farmer, as the perception is of most farmers, which is inaccurate. So most of you know, Mark went through a very lengthy divorce, incredibly expensive divorce several years ago. The equestrian aspect of the business this year has significantly declined, and it isn't just Mark's show centre, it's pretty much every equestrian show centre in the country. Now, in order to mitigate those losses, and given Mark wants to remain at that property, Mark would like to diversify by way of this festival. Now, when we decided to apply for a new licence again, we thought it would be a good idea to maybe go worst case scenario, high numbers, 3 days, 18 to 30 age bracket. In reality, it might be a family festival like Carfest over 3 days, 5,000 people. But we went, as I say, worst case scenario. Now, the reason for that is because of revenue. Revenue's down, costs are rising, and Mark's 59 years of age and doesn't necessarily have an appetite for having to worry about several businesses every single day. And Duncan touched on the point before, and it isn't a veiled threat like the one Mr. Cole's just made. But Mark has had interest from waste companies to purchase the site. There's a waste transfer licence on that site for thousands of tonnes a year. There's significant interest from waste companies. There's significant interest from property developers. So what would you prefer to have at the back of your houses, is my question.
Not a load of music and people shouting and screaming drunk at night, which is what we get now. And on top of that, I mean, not long ago, Mr. Marshall had 2 knee replacements. One night we had the strobe lights from your building flashing into our house, simply because I'd taken down some conifers in the back garden. I tried to phone Western Lawns and Western Fisheries and all the numbers that you say. I don't have your personal number and I don't have Mark's. I couldn't get hold of anybody and I couldn't stop this. The man didn't have any sleep that night. These lights were coming from your event and shining into our house. That's how powerful the lights were. This is why we object to all this, you know.
Comments several weeks ago, and we have done something about that, and it's just unfortunate that you wasn't able to get hold of anybody on that evening. Had you been able to, then we would of course done something about it. Up until then we didn't realise it was an issue, and we don't want it to be an issue for you. You know, at the end of the day you live 300 yards away, as do we, and we want everybody to be as happy as one can be given the circumstances. You know, we don't want to antagonise people and upset people on purpose. So apologies for that night. And I can assure you it won't happen again. Okay.
It might not happen again, but the problem is you're going to have thousands of people there, and that's going to be absolute pandemonium. They're not going to listen to people. They don't when they're like that. They get drunk. They're going to be over the fences, over the fields. They're going to be walking up and down the drives. It'll be chaos. You ain't going to be able to control it. They say they will, but you know, you can't control it now.
There's a couple of points to make on that. First of all, in terms of where the site plan is, most of the activity is located in the bottom field, and we've done that with the purpose of kind of keeping away from your properties and other similar properties. If you'll notice, the main area where all of the action is taken is actually in the bottom field. The conference centre is not actually going to be used for any public access. It's just a back of house area. The parking, again, it's down in the fields, which mitigates it. And I kind of have to disagree in terms of public behaviour because it's controlled by security. We have eviction procedures. I can't comment on any of the previous activities, but what I do know is our security provider will be tasked to make sure people aren't doing that. We'll have defence measures in place, CCTV, response teams, and it's not uncommon to, have to report people to the police and local authorities, but generally it's all managed by ourselves and the security team, which is, they've got a specific plan, and that's also something that in the SAG process, any of the local authorities will have an input on that, and they will obviously have their views heard as well.
Just make the point that the notion that every single event ends in bedlam and chaos, there wouldn't be any events. If that was the case, if people weren't able to manage attendees in a way that didn't disrupt the lives of those who live around the event, things like Glastonbury wouldn't take place, or any other huge event. Of course, people can be managed if the systems are in place and there's adequate personnel and there's adequate means of dealing with that. So to suggest that this is going to be some sort of out of control event where people are just going to run amok, it just because that isn't, there's no evidence to support that other than simply an assertion that that's what people always do when they attend events. Well, they don't. Of course they don't, because if they did, there wouldn't be big events. They wouldn't exist. So I just have to make that point. Thank you.
How would you know? You don't live here. You're here on their defence, but at the end of the day, we live here. We're the people that are at the back garden of this place, and it's bad now. So you try covering all this music up, it's impossible. It's not going to happen. We live 200 yards from their building. My back garden is right onto their events. We get it all the time. So it's all right saying you're not going to have loud music. You're going to have loud music. It's going to be absolute chaos. And it's going to destroy people's lives. It's all right when, when this is done, people go home. The damage that it causes afterwards, this ain't going to, it's just going to be an absolute crazy. It really is. Please think about this. It will be absolute pandemonium down there.
Can I just say there was a very large local event which took place in Bedworth Park not very long ago with many thousands of people who attended, and I don't think that ruined anybody's lives.
Okay, can I intervene? Right. I'm going to ask the panel if they have any questions of the objectors before we move on to the final stage. Any panel?
Yeah, can I ask a question, please? Have any of you as objectors reported any of these issues to your local police previously?
I've contacted the council on numerous occasions about Western Lawns. Nothing's been done. I've contacted the environmental health at least 4 times. Nothing. Not one person has been out to my house. We have a problem now, and it's still doing it. We've got video footage of them in the last week dumping raw sewage into the brook, going onto Wenbrook. I've contacted the environmental health. We've got video footage of it. Nobody's done anything. So, you can understand it. If nobody's doing anything now, even if we complain if this was held up, what they're going to do?
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, I'm sorry, I omitted you from the last round. Do you have any comments or questions that you're allowed to make at this stage on the application?
No, not concerning the application. Okay. Mr. Bigger raised the point just now about contact with the environmental section. And as you are aware, we haven't had any representations from them. I have asked them the question if there's any ongoing cases, and they have said no. They have had some things reported, but they haven't got an ongoing investigation going on.
I spoke to Andrew Snowden he rang me just last Friday and said that he was going to try and get the environmental health. So he's aware of something. Yeah.
Can I just say, the reason we haven't contacted the police is because people know where we live. We don't know where they live. So they're causing a disturbance and annoyance to us. They can come back and damage our property at any time, vehicles or anything, because they know where we are. So that is the reason I've been so close to contacting the police on many occasions, and I've put it off for that reason alone. Have I got to have 24-hour security around my premises to prevent this happening 365 days a year? Do you think that's good enough? Because I don't.
Julianne, can I just ask you, in regard to, we've just talked about our environmental health, have the police reported anything back? I know they're not objecting, but is there anything?
No, we haven't had anything reported via licensing.
Okay, so at this stage now, I'm going to invite both sides to sum up, but it is going to be time limited, I'm afraid. So if we can be as brief as possible. Okay, there you go. Mr. Marshall.
I didn't realise I was going to have another bite of the cherry. I think I've said what I wanted to say, that I think really a period of probation should be introduced and see how the patient gets on for a while, given that certain things have been admitted and some of us are clearly very adamant that other things exist in all of this. And during that probation, obviously, that the licence should be refused. But if the authority are minded to grant a licence, either now or at any time in the future, it shouldn't be such a great leap from the sort of numbers that are being dealt with now. And really, I don't have anything further to say. I think I've said it all in writing and elsewhere.
Is that the statements from all? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I won't be quite as brief as Mr. Marshall, but I'll try and be as brief as I can. I won't reiterate. I'll just have to make a couple of points. I mean, look, Mr. Marshall's put a figure of 5,000 without any empirical basis for that. The application is for 12,500, but it's right to say if environmental health and or the police and or public health or any other statutory body think that 12,500 isn't manageable in some way, or it's going to impact negatively on people's lives, they will cap the numbers. And so, as Denise has said, that is a limit, but it may well be that whichever event takes place next year will be for less than that. But that is a number that will be subject to regulatory scrutiny and oversight by anyone who is involved in the SAG. I have to apologise for one thing. I misunderstood the sewage situation. I'm very grateful for Denise for clearing that up. So certainly didn't want to mislead any there, and I think it speaks well of Mark that he's made that concession and he's going to commit to that. But the sewage provision, the alleged burning of the litter, the premises licence at the Equestrian Centre are not relevant, I would respectfully submit, to this application. What we're dealing with here is an application for an event for 1 weekend a year that will be subject to significant oversight via the SAG process to ensure that it causes minimum disruption to the lives of the people who live nearby, not just the objectors, but everybody else who lives nearby, and that it is a safe environment for people to attend and enjoy themselves and have a nice weekend. There is a lot of speculation here from the objectors about how this is going to definitely cause huge levels of disruption to their lives. Well, they've got no basis for that whatsoever. All they're basing that on is their perception and what notion they have of the event. And I would just ask them to just bear in mind that it's not a case that Mark can just put this event on without any form of restraint upon him or the matters that take place in terms of the location of the speakers, the times, everything. The regulatory bodies will have a huge level of input into how this event is run, and their main priority there will have two priorities when doing that: disruption to people who live nearby and the safety of people who attend, and they will not sign that off unless they are satisfied that those two criteria will be met. And I just finish off, try to avoid too much law, but the guidance is clear, Section 182 guidance, that responsible authorities, your main source of advice in relation to the Licensing Act, and every responsible authority has looked at this application and are satisfied that it does that. They've all effectively, there have been no representations from them, and they've done that for a very specific reason. And so for that reason, and for all the other reasons I've set out, I would invite you to grant this application as it now stands. And if you do that, as I've said, there will be the SAG process, but I hope that both Denise and Mark have made it clear today that they want to engage in dialogue with the neighbours going forward to ensure that they deliver on what I'm saying on their behalf today. And maybe some phone numbers could be exchanged today, but certainly that was something that they would definitely welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Craig, thank you very much. We're clearly going to adjourn now to make our decision, but can I invite the clerk to advise on when we'll be coming back in? Will we come back in to give the decision? Will it be done in writing? Could you just advise on that one, please, so everybody understands what we're going to do now? Thanks.
Chair, today we will adjourn to make the decision, and if we make the decision today, we will... Is that one on? Hear me now? Okay. Chair, we will adjourn now, and if we make a decision today, we will relay the decision to the parties today. If not, we have a certain number of days within the regulation to make the decision and relay that information at a later date. So for now, we would adjourn and consider the deliberations and then come back. But the adjournment time is entirely up to yourself. If we say half an hour, if everybody wanted to have lunch, or... So what time shall we reconvene?
If we've made a decision, it'll be 2 o'clock. If we haven't made a decision, we won't be here, and you'll know we're still deliberating. Okay? Yeah, so we will reconvene at 2 to let you know where we are with that. Are we okay to leave our stuff here?
Yeah, you should be.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so having considered the representations from both parties today, the panel has decided that the application will be granted, subject to the following. 1, that the plan submitted in the original application, amended as highlighted at the hearing, is incorporated as part of the original application. And 2, that after the first licensed event, the licence is reviewed in the light of any concerns from the local community or responsible authorities, etc. And 3, a written record of this decision will be sent to all parties afterwards. And all I can say is thank you very much for your patience, for your explanations, for your involvement. Thank you.
Just to be clear, when you say reviewed, you don't mean a review under Section 51 of the Licensing Act. You mean a debrief and a... Yes, I'm being nodded up by your legal advisor. Thank you very much. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.